I'd like to continue with another part of the novel, which is Mike Shintani's story, uh, specifically about his father who mysteriously died in a plane crash north of Lake Superior back when Mike was 15. Now, Mike found a dream diary that his dad wrote, kept up to date during that period, and it was all in Japanese. So he found somebody at the University of Toronto to translate for him. And so this is looks at the relationship between him and Naoko. This chapter takes place in 1990 and 91. Naoko became much more relaxed around me. She looked me straight in the eyes, smiled when she saw me, and revealed her thoughts. "Mr. Michael, I have strong feeling for you," she began. "I feel you are like your father. I mean, sensitive and full of thought." "Okay, but I doubt it. Call me Mike, okay?" She smiled. She just seemed like a different person. If truth be told, I had strong feeling for her too. The allure of those eyes grew beyond my first experience of them. That tingling within me grew stronger as time passed. Once, during a winter afternoon when the sky was thick yet clear like blue honey, I caught her profile in the light as she moved to put the kettle on for tea. A warmth came over my body. It was almost overwhelming. She turned to face me and her eyes grew in my imagination until they seemed like hypnotic discs. I filled up with wonder. I talked about her to Glenn more than once. I didn't dare introduce him to her, and for good reason. After one long confessional about her, he took me aside to ask if she had any friends. I was incredulous and tried to put him off. What in the world would you have in common with a Japanese student working on her PhD? Hey, I like smart chicks. From that moment, I vowed never to inflict any of the boys on her. I did take her home for Oshogatsu 1991. I was nervous of what she might think, a man in his 30s living with his mom. Then again, the Japanese and Japanese Canadians really don't expect their children to move out until they marry. Naoko was out, but she was a student. She got a pass, I'm sure. The pewter sky was oppressive as we shuffled along Sullivan Street from the Art Gallery streetcar stop at Beverly Street. The sidewalk was hard, brittle, and unyielding, but the bare trees bent over slightly as if to welcome us. The front yards and gardens were empty, since there had been no snow since last November, when the first fall came as a flurry, but didn't stick. We walked hand in hand, or rather glove and mitten, even though it was cold as a well-digger's ass, as Tom Waits would say. From within her heavy coat and hood, Naoko kept looking at the house numbers zipping past, anxious to find my mom's place. I peered into the surrounding darkness, imagining the shadows of Little Tokyo accompanying us. It actually wasn't called Little Tokyo or Japantown or J-Town back in the 1950s and 60s. It was just the neighborhood where we first lived. Every Nikkei individual and institution started life in Toronto there. The Watadas lived on McCall Street. The Ishidas, Matsubas, Kiyonagas, Nakamura's, Sugiura's, Tabuchis, and so many more lived on adjoining streets. The first Toronto Buddhist church started in a row house on Huron Street. The Reverend Tsuji and his wife lived in the crowded space. The planning of the Buddhist church on Bathurst took place there, as did that of the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center. Members of the various Kenjin-kai and the political arm of the community, the Japanese Canadian Citizens Association, met in the back room of the Nikko Garden restaurant. The New Canadian and the Continental Times, both on Queen Street near Spadina, kept churning out weekly issues with community news for a shrinking subscriber base. Nikkei businesses sprang up within the confines. The Tsuji brothers opened an auto repair garage in the back alley. Illegal, but it made money. A Japanese and later English language bookstore opened by Kameoka-san ran out of his house on Sullivan Street. The Kawasaki's corner store, with three young brothers always fighting, sat at Huron and Dundas. The food co-op nearby, operated by the Buddhist church, eventually turned into Furia, a Japanese grocery store with a somber Mr. Ishida as the butcher and a smiling and friendly Mrs. Ishida on the fish counter. Perched above was Nikko Garden, the first formal dining Japanese restaurant in Toronto, owned and run by Gus and Jim Karonaga, brothers who hated each other, so much so that Gus acted as maitre d' while Jim worked in the back. Or was it the opposite? The farthest outpost east was the Ginza Cafe at Bay and Dundas, where anyone could get teishoku, ochazuke, and denbatsuke at the long counter. Other Japanese grocery stores opened and spread out along the nexus of Spadina and Dundas. Sandown Market, Sanko Trading, and the venerable Dundas Union. Harry Sugimoto, his family stuck in a house on Dundas so narrow you could touch each wall by spreading your arms, would soon open Danforth Cleaners in the East End when he made a little money. Dr. Kuwabara, family doctor, and Dr. Nakashima, a dentist, were together at Spadina and Bloor. The Nikkei youth also had fun. The Nisei Club staged parties like the Harvest Dance, the Sadie Hawkins Do, and the Christmas Social at the Hagerman Hall, located right in the heart of the original Chinatown, much to the dismay of their Issei elders who frowned on touch dancing. Bowling and ice hockey leagues formed. Sansei attended Japanese language classes twice a week at the YMCA at College and Young. The Nikkei would not move into the suburbs near and far until later, when racist tensions and restrictions eased. If they ended up living in the same neighborhood, never mind street, it was by pure happenstance. Most families didn't want to be Japanese Canadian by that point. All the Issei Nisei homes, businesses, and institutions were gone, or virtually gone, by the 90s, becoming ghosts, haunting me as a childhood memories does everyone. The New Year's feast had become a little sad, with no one coming over to visit. Friends and relatives stopped just before the 1990s. Mom made a small amount of sushi, futomaki, and agezushi only. She also prepared a smattering of tempura, morsels of char-siu, bought at Golden City no doubt, and the plate of chow mein, Japanese Canadian style. There was a pot of steamed rice, a staple. We weren't iconoclasts after all. But gone were the days of abundant delicacies, though Boku's mom and others still put on the hog. I stopped going, given what happened to my pal. Besides, I was no longer invited, and I understood. Too embarrassed, since I knew too much. Naoko was all smiles as I opened the front door, and we took off our shoes in the hallway. I followed her down the long dark hall to the dining room in the back. Okasan greeted her with as much warmth as she could muster. My mom's eroded face, thinning hair, and a slight stoop to her back slowed her down to a shuffle. Naoko bowed and said something in Japanese while presenting her host with a bouquet of flowers. I could see Okasan was pleased, surprised, even uplifted by my girlfriend. She always encouraged me to bring home my romantic interests, though I always suspected she wanted to check them out, make sure they were the right kind. You can marry anyone you want, as long as she's Japanese, she used to say. Though it was early in our relationship, I decided to bring Naoko home. She was the first, and it felt right. Oka made the effort to bring clean plates to the table when Naoko jumped up to help. No, you sit. Michael, help me, she commanded. Oh, right, sorry. We spent a pleasant hour or two celebrating New Year's and my perceived escape from celibacy. But the final Ogochiso-sama, my mother pulled me aside. Michael, you'd better be careful with this one. Why? Well, she's Japanese. I thought you'd be pleased. Yes, but you aren't used to such girls. They're different from Canadian girls. They're not spoiled sansei. You're nuts, Ma. She wanted me to date Japanese, and now I was. She seemed to be telling me to dump her. Michael, she said, and grabbed my arm. Yeah, Ma, she's not what she seems. My mother was always having visions. She was sensitive to otherworldly forces. She knew I was going to break my leg, for example. The evening before my football game back in high school, she pleaded with me not to play. I dismissed her warning since it was a championship game, and as foretold, I broke my leg tackling the fullback for the opposition. The worst of her predictions came the night before Dad left for Northern Ontario. She had a dream and woke up screaming. I hurried to her bedroom to find Dad comforting her. Four ghosts had risen through the floorboards at the foot of her bed and started nattering at her. What they said was incomprehensible, but she knew something evil had entered our lives. My parents argued about it the next day, and Dad wouldn't hear about it and departed. It wasn't like Mom went to fortune tellers in Chinatown, but she was always worried about things based on her vision. I had no idea what her warning about Naoko meant, but I was happy. I was so happy I dismissed her perception as superstition. I will admit there was something about Naoko and her effect on me. In Grange Park, bleak, with the burden of winter and the lateness of the evening, Naoko and I huddled and walked to the university subway. The chill of dark winter enveloped us in a lace of frost. The distant houses and building lights in their crystalline sparkle made the air brittle, skin scraping and fragile. I wondered what Oka meant by her warning I dismissed as a symptom of old age. They all said she was very good, very authentic, Naoko offered. I knew she was being polite. After a pause, she commented, Your Okasa is very nice, but she is sad. Yeah, I suppose she is. Don't know why, other than Dad being gone. Does she know about diary? Yeah, kinda. She won't even look at it. She fell quiet before she spoke again. Why not? Don't know. It probably has something to do with his death, crashing in a plane north of Lake Superior. Why you go there? She asked demurely. Why indeed? The thought of it brought back old feelings, old mysteries and questions, old pain. Don't know. Searching for something, I guess. Maybe Mom will tell me at the proper juncture, I said in a mocking Woodhouse tone. She smiled and turned away for fear of prying. In point of fact, I just didn't know the truth. No one can ever know his father completely, but I craved to know a little of my father's truth. The danger for me, the fear I had, was that the truth would ring hollow. As I kissed Naoko goodnight before her apartment door, I noticed that the tingling feeling within me was gone. I turned and headed back home. In the days and weeks thereafter, as Naoko and I went deeper into his words, we discussed most of the text, since it was either too hard to decipher or seemingly unimportant. What we did salvage struck an odd chord with me. It was as if Dad was conveying a message to me, though there was no direct address to me or anyone else, family or friends. By this point I was intrigued enough to keep urging Naoko for more and more information. I could only go so far and come to a dead end. It was then I decided to talk to Mom. I didn't know Dad knew Japanese, I asked one late afternoon, when the light had dulled and the rain clouds threatened. She sat in her favorite chair, knitting. He spent some time in Japan, she said curtly. When was that? I don't remember him going. Before you, was all she said. Can you give me some details, like why, when, and where? Ask your uncle. She meant Uncle Kunio out in Vancouver. He was my courtesy uncle, since I had no real ones. Right. Who's Jamie? She's all over the book. I stretched the truth to make a point. Mom's face froze in a kind of surprise and subdued horror. Oka? Who is Jamie? Someone you know? Someone? She curled up into a ball of silence and avoidance. Thank you.